Welcome to the Actual Faith channel. I am your host, Jeremy Scott DeSpain, and this channel and podcast is committed to building the faith of Christians through a biblical worldview. And today we're going to find out if heathens and Christians can get along. And I'd like to introduce to you the Godless Engineer, John Gleason. He's with me. He's an atheist who I met on YouTube, and we've had some indirect interactions by critiquing each other's thoughts and beliefs. But today, we're going to chat together, and I'm looking forward to learning more about you, John. So welcome. I'm glad that you're with us today.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. Although I do want to specify right out the beginning, which I don't expect you to know this, but there's been a big dust up about the use of the word heathen. I technically don't identify as a heathen. I go by the label atheist. Heathens is a very specific type of pagan religion, and so I don't want anybody to cues this up to think that I'm part of that. I'm an atheist, just in a very much more broad sense of the word heathen. Am I a heathen? So yeah. just getting that out there before anybody gets on here is like, he's not a heathen.
And that's good. I appreciate it. I know you use it as a play on words in many of your shows. So yeah, technically speaking, it could be anyone that just doesn't practice some of the three great religions, Judaism, Christianity, or Muslim. But you're right, there is sort of this heathenry religion or pagan religion. And to make that distinction from the beginning is probably a wise one. But some might be asking, especially those that watch my channel on a regular basis, if this channel is about Christianity, why do you have an atheist on your show? Well, because we are both humans that have questions about life and reality, and it's important that we can discuss ideas openly and still remain friendly to everyone. And you'll find out more about the Godless Engineer if you look at the link in the description of this video, and I would encourage you to check out some of his content. It's important for us to know the origin of belief, to also be open to changing belief if it does not match with reality. I have a personal belief that all truth ultimately leads to God, but obviously not everyone has that belief. And John has a different belief. In fact, he spends much of his time on his channel critiquing Christian belief and or other religious beliefs. And he's done that with some of my videos. But the reality is that today we're here, we're just talking as two guys about belief, about our background. You might hear a little bit about John's story, mine as well. But John, would you just tell us a little bit about your channel and what you do on your channel and why?
Right. Yeah. So over on Godless Engineer, I pretty much put together like response videos. We also do like a Bible study in the form of a podcast, and we do a bunch of things over there. We cover a bunch of topics that are related to just in general being a non-believer in God or any one particular religion. We actually have a good number of people that are Christian that watch the channel because they enjoy having that kind of critical look at so some of the worst religious arguments out there. So we do have some religious people that like to come over there and watch. But for the most part, my target audience is this heathens. And that would be like Jeremy said before, anybody that doesn't subscribe to the major three religions, being Islam or Judaism or Christianity, or even some of the up and coming religions that are kind of gaining a little bit in popularity. Just as long as you're not part of any of the major religions, then that's the audience that I'm targeting. And so with my response videos, I try to provide good arguments against whatever talking points the person has, or I critique a person's talking points either about atheism or about God, Jesus, New Testament, or Holy Book in general. So that's pretty much what we do over there on Godless Engineer.
And you take on some pretty big names in your critique. I mean, I see you take on guys like J. Warner Wallace, Tim Barnett, some of these guys from maybe even William Lane Craig. I mean, you'll basically critique any idea, which is what I like about you, that you don't shy away from that, because it's really not about trying to just outsmart somebody. It's really about getting to the root of the belief, whether it is true, whether it's reasonable, and that's important. So you said in the very beginning you wanted to make the distinction because I put it in the title. Can heathens and Christians get along? And by the way, if you jumped on a little bit late to the stream, I want to encourage you to share this stream and subscribe to this channel, Actual Faith. If you've not subscribed already, check out John's content in the link to the description of this video. And we're going to be talking today a little bit about John. We're going to talk about his disbelief in God or lack of belief in God, which leads me to this idea of atheism, because you made that distinction between being a heathen or an atheist. Do you consider yourself an atheist? And if so, how do you define atheism, and what led you on the road to atheism? Did you grow up in an atheistic household? Talk to us a little bit about that. Take some time there.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, I do identify as an atheist, and I primarily identify as an atheist because I just don't believe in a God. Technically, if you wanted to be accurate about my position, you would call me an agnostic atheist, because while I don't know whether or not a God exists or not, I don't believe in one, or I don't believe one to exist. And belief and knowledge, while they're very closely related, they are distinct whenever you're talking about, these things in particular. So I generally like to, differentiate between both of those things by saying an agnostic atheist. And as far as atheism, like definition, I think that there are many definitions, that could apply to the label atheist. I think that the harder atheist definition of, somebody that says there is no God is a very applicable definition. But I also think that somebody that simply just doesn't believe in a God also meets the definition of an atheist, which would also include some of the agnostics out there. But I think that it's more important to understand what a person means by the label than quibbling over like definitions of the label and stuff like that. So I typically try to just understand what a person means by the label that they use, and then I just go on from there. So if you don't want to consider me an atheist, then I don't know what label you would use, but I just simply don't believe in a God.
Sure.
And then to go into, I guess, how I came to be an atheist. I didn't grow up in a atheistic household. I mean, I've lived all my life in most of my life in northern Alabama, and then I spent 6 months about in southern Alabama, but that was pretty short lived. So most of my life northern Alabama, and I grew up just thinking that God exists by default, and I never thought to question it or anything like that. I grew up Catholic initially. I went to a Catholic private school, went to a Catholic church more than regularly, because going to a Catholic private school, you not only have to go like on the Sunday masses, but you also have I believe it was like a Friday mass maybe that we were mandated to go to. And then of course during Catholic school, we also had religion like times, like just basically a subject directly devoted to religion, and that would be of course Christianity. And so we started off there, and then after we left the Catholic church, we moved into a more, I guess, Baptist sort of mindsets. I know I eventually went through a number of different Protestant denominations of Christianity. And, I was Southern Baptist for a little bit, or at least I went to a Southern Baptist church. I went to a non-denominational church and went back to Southern Baptist. My mom actually ended up in a Lutheran church. And my dad has always been Catholic. He remains Catholic to this day. So you might be wondering, like, you grew up with all this religion, why did you become an atheist? Well, I actually got challenged by a really close friend of mine. It was after a night of playing church softball, and this is a friend that I felt like I could confide in and everything like that. And I told him about my doubts and everything about, like, believing in the Bible or believing in God or not really knowing, some things. And so he pretty much laid it out to me like, you've got to believe in the Bible from cover to cover, or else you're not a true Christian. And of course, now I know that's a new true Scotsman fallacy, because there's many different interpretations about the Bible, and all of them fit within a
Mm,
Christian worldview. But at the time, I was like, well, if that's what it means to be a true Christian, I guess I'm, not a true Christian. And so I gotta figure out what I actually believe. So I started thinking about, if I actually believed in a God, which I guess I kind of went through a more deistic kind of phase there, where I was like, well, maybe a God actually exists. He's just, we don't know anything about him.
mm,
And so, I watched a lot of debates, because I felt like watching the debates would give me both sides. Like, you would have one person for the existence of God and one person against it. And, you would weigh, you yourself personally would weigh, like, which one makes more sense to you. And I
mhm,
always found myself coming out on the side of the atheist, agreeing with the atheist, and saying, well, yeah, that argument doesn't make a lot of sense because of all the reasons that they said. And then I would spend time thinking on my own, like, well, does it really not make sense? And, kind of checking myself and everything. And after this long, arduous process of, thinking about what I believed, why I believed it, and what I'm convinced of, I eventually had to admit to myself that I didn't believe in a God. And, you
mm,
know, that was actually the biggest hurdle, coming from the South and being taught that you have to believe in God, and having it drilled into your head that good people believe in God, or good people go to church every Sunday and all this
mm,
other stuff. After having all that drilled into me, it was really hard for me to get over that hurdle of admitting that I'm just not convinced that a God exists. So it was at that point, I kind of really got into more of the, uh, you know, I guess reading more atheistic literature.
mm,
Of course, there's the classic books that I'm sure you've heard all atheists talk about, like Hitchens,
mm,
Religion Poisons Everything. That book. I didn't really read Dawkins' books, because I never really questioned whether or not evolution was real. Like, I was
mm.
never a creationist. Like, I was not fundamentalist in that way.
Okay.
So that really didn't play into anything as far as my journey from Christian to atheist. But like, I guess I read more of the philosophical things. Like, I know I read up on Sam Harris's, like, free will,
Yeah.
and books of that nature. I believe I read most of his Letter to a Christian Nation. But I read a bunch of those books, and I found myself, of course, seeing the issues, that I just had never seen before, because I had never thought about it. And so um, that's I think I went a little bit farther than you maybe
No,
wanted me to.
that's exactly what I wanted to hear. Is I wanted to hear a little bit about kind of how you moved into this belief, because sometimes I wonder, is there an aha moment? Christianity, we talk about conversion, right? There's this moment where you become a Christian, or some may think you grew up in a Christian home. But I'm just curious, was there for you an aha moment, or was this sort of brick by brick? Each argument just kind of led to the next. What about this? If there wasn't an aha moment, who's been the most influential atheist or piece of literature that has kind of pushed you over the edge to say, okay, this is a worldview that I can cling to? And we talked about this off air before, that yes, there are different stripes of even Christians and or atheist agnostics. So it's hard to place everything generally. But for you personally, what does that look like?
Um, well, so I didn't really. I guess I kind of sort of had an aha moment. The
Mm,
aha moment wasn't about being an atheist. The aha moment was about whether or not I considered myself to be a Christian.
mm,
Because the aha moment was when my friend said, you have to believe in the Bible from cover to cover, in order to be a true Christian, which, like I said before, obviously I know now as a no true Scotsman, and I don't think that line of that particular thing should convince anybody to like leave Christianity or anything like that, because, I didn't know about like the no true Scotsman fallacy or any of these logical problems with a lot of the arguments that Christian apologists use. And so it was that kind of aha moment, like, well, I know I don't believe in Genesis as history. I know that I don't believe that God like created everything. I know I don't believe all these very basic things in the Bible, because, grown up Catholic, having hours a day dedicated to studying religion from a very young age, like I knew a good bit of the Christian theology like the back of my hand. I understood it, and a lot of what I knew just didn't make sense to me based on what I thought God was, or what I thought the Bible taught that God was. And so I was like, well, I can't believe in it cover to cover, so I guess I'm not really a Christian. And so that was the kind of aha moment that I had there. But then I had to figure out what I actually did believe, and that at that point it became a step, like a brick by brick kind of process of figuring out, if I believe this, this sounds convincing, but is it really like convincing, or is it really a good argument? Because you can have good arguments that aren't logically sound or aren't good in general. So just looking at all the religious arguments versus all of the rebuttals from atheists, or the atheist arguments against a God existing. I just honestly, I just became convinced of not believing in a God. Like, just I became convinced that there just was no good evidence to suggest that you should believe in a God. So I had to admit to myself that I wasn't. So it was kind of a mixture of both. And then as far as influential atheists, I can't really I can't really put a firm like thumb on anyone in particular.
Sure.
The best thing that I could do is just state that the debates between theists and atheists, those were some of the most influential things, because I really got to see the comparison of arguments, like in quality and quantity, and how people reacted and everything like that. It really kind of highlighted that for me. So, like, one of the most memorable ones that I can think of is Sam Harris versus William Lane Craig on the idea of free will. Sam Harris puts forth his idea of a more secular basis for free will, and of course William Lane Craig has the theistic sort of version of free will. That one was pretty influential to me. The another one was the Hitchens Stephen Fry versus the Catholic side.
Okay.
There was a Q and I think it was a Q&A debate maybe, or something. Can't remember. It was a British television show where they debated these types of things.
Okay.
And so it was Fry and Hitchens versus basically the Catholic Church. And every time, like, the atheists were making these solid points that made sense to me, and they at least to me at the time made logical sound sense, while the Catholics, they didn't really seem to make a lot of sense to me. So it was really the debates that I watched that really kind of hit it home for me. And it really didn't matter exactly who was debating. It really mattered as to the arguments that were made. Because like another one just coming to mind right now that I've watched a few times is Frank Turk versus Hitchens.
Okay. Yeah.
That one right there is a pretty old one, but that one was pretty influential to me as well. Of course, you have to keep in mind that the landscape for atheism at the time that I was kind of coming into it was not as diverse as it is now.
Sure. Yeah.
It definitely was like primarily like the quote unquote four horsemen of
Mm.
atheism
Yeah.
that had content out there. They were the ones that had books written. They were the ones that were talking about these things. Sorry. So yeah, so I mean those were the people that had like the books out there about it. So those were the people that I was reading. I definitely think that we have a much more diverse set of creators now. We got a much more diverse set of voices out there where you can definitely hear a lot of great points and counterpoints from both sides.
Mm.
Um, but you know, yeah, I guess tying this all back around, it was the debates that really kind of hit it home with me, and not any one particular atheist.
Yeah, that's great. I enjoy watching debates myself, and I enjoy seeing who does a good job on the debate skills. You see someone like William Lane Craig, and he probably could pick any position. The guy is a wizard debater. He's amazing. The issue, though, is sometimes you can have the right content and not be a good debater. And so you have to sometimes work through that because someone might have some good points, but it's just not being presented well. But it sounds like for you, it was the same for me. I like thinking through an issue. I like seeing how it's presented. I want to know if it's logical, if it's reasonable, and that's great. I think that's wonderful. So, if you're just joining us, you hopped in a little bit late. I'm with John Gleason, Godless Engineer, and I want to encourage you right now to like this video. If you're enjoying the content, share the stream. I know it'll be a help to someone later on. We're just talking about Christianity, atheists, agnostics. Can we get along? Is it something that we can talk through? Can we have fruitful dialogue? Now, I want to pivot the conversation just a little bit as we talk about content, because we're both content creators. I'm a Christian, there's no doubt. You look at my channel, I'm trying to build and strengthen Christians through a biblical worldview. You look on John's and you see that he provides a lot of content, and sometimes just being critical of some of the beliefs out there of religion. So as we talk about this, John, what do you think needs to happen in order for atheists and Christians or religious people to be peaceable? I mean, what are some things that come to mind? If we're going to live together in this world and we're going to have fruitful conversations, what needs to happen?
Well, I think that, and I definitely admit to falling prey to this too, but I think that we need to, stop looking for the dumpster fire conversations. That's the best way that I can put it. Just the conversations where people just want to throw insults at each other, or try to burn the other person's house down. I feel like a lot of people have become accustomed to those kinds of conversations on both sides. And I think that for us to peaceably sort of come together and really start building I guess a better conversation between both sides, is to stop looking to insult and I guess rail against the opposition. Because just like you had said here just a few minutes ago, is that you like to do the exact same thing that I did. We just came out on different sides of it, and I really don't think that it's beneficial or it's all that warranted to treat somebody like they're an idiot or they're stupid or anything like that, just because they come to a different conclusion. Now, of course, I used to do flat Earth content, and so I'm sure that you can find a lot of content of mine where I do the exact opposite of what I'm saying right now. But I could say what I'm saying right now because I've been in the midst of the whole ad hominem and like just being insulting and being a butthole,
Yeah, sure.
And so I've been in the midst of that, and it doesn't help the conversation. Like it doesn't help anybody. I mean, people see entertainment value in it because they like to see drama. They like to see fights. And Maybe it's just because I'm getting up there in my age. I'm becoming an old fart, but I find that having, fruitful conversations where people actually, talk about their differing ideas rather than just slinging mud at each other. I think those are some of the better conversations that happen.
Yeah, I think you're right. And when we talk about this, so if you could talk to a Christian content creator, or even me, if you're giving me some wisdom, some advice, what should Christians just stop saying about atheists that is just absolutely annoying?
Well, so one of the things that really gets on my nerves is when they Christian apologists or your Christian interlocutor will bust out with, well, you're just suppressing the knowledge that
Mm,
God exists,
that's good.
because it's I can understand somebody thinking that that is the case, but it's really not, because suggesting that someone's just suppressing that knowledge because they don't want to believe in God, or that they just because they want to sin or something like that,
Mm,
it kind of ignores the problems that Christians face on a daily basis. I mean,
mm,
living in North Alabama, I mean, I there are people that are Christian but don't, quote unquote, act Christian. Because when I was growing up, I was taught that to be a good Christian, you treat everybody respectfully.
mm,
You don't bad talk somebody, stuff like that. But you have people that do that all the time, and then you also have the other moral failings of supposed good Christian people, and they're given free passes because they are Christian.
mm,
And to suggest that I'm suppressing knowledge of God existing because I want to sin is kind of ignoring the fact that Christians still sin, choosing to sin, and then immediately asking for forgiveness. Which I know maybe Catholics are a little bit more bad about this than Protestants are, but I've known quite a few Protestants that will do uh, you know horrible things and then just think, oh well, I've worked it out with God, everything's fine, there's no problem here.
mm,
And so it's really like a belief in God is not um like me not believing in God is not because I want to sin, because even if I did believe in God, I would still sin. So it really doesn't, like, I'm really not suppressing anything. I'm just not convinced, and I don't control what convinces me. You know,
mm.
I wouldn't expect you to think that you can control what convinces you, because you either become convinced of something or you're not. You know.
I think what you said is powerful. And this really isn't about my testimony or anything to that nature. But if I were to spend some time talking about my background, it was a bit inverse from yours. I didn't grow up in a church going home. Sure, there were some influences like American Christianity, and you say your quick Hail Mary before you go in for your surgery, but it wasn't like a church going home. So um, I can only imagine that I think people might want to believe, that there's a God. They might want to believe these things. It's throughout history we see this, but it doesn't necessarily mean that, I didn't consider myself a Christian or become a Christian until I was a teenager. So to think that all the way up until the time I was a teenager, that every night I went to bed with this big dark void in my heart, and all I was thinking about is how can I live without God? It's just not the reality. And I know most people don't think that. Now, there may be a theological significance, or there could be times in our life or moments where we go through difficult times and we just ask questions or we pillow our head at night. But to, like you said, lead with that may be a little insensitive and probably stretching what we really feel like, because I mean, there are a number of things that can give us happiness in the midst of these things. And sometimes we miss that. So I think that's really good. Let's think about another thing. I mean, what are some things that you see your maybe atheist friends and or just atheist community in general? I think we have people we don't like representing us sometimes. Let's be honest. I mean, every worldview has someone that they wish would just settle down a little bit in the comments, would just be careful with what they say, how they say it, the tact in which they say it. What are some things that atheists should just stop saying about Christians to make the playing field a little bit even?
Well, I think that one of the problems that I see with the atheist, I guess, community or the atheist demographic is this propensity to uh, trying to think of the best way to put it. It's the propensity to uh, sling mud at religious people
Mm,
just because they're religious.
mm,
And this comes in the form of, calling people stupid, or call like I know a lot of people in the atheist community call apologists grifters, or like saying they're only doing it for the money and things
mm,
like that. And I think that it's a bit myopic to suggest these things, because me growing up and even going to college, and graduating from high school, everybody that I've known has been Christian,
mm,
and there have been some stupid people, but for the most part, like as far as people go, like they're not stupid because they believe in God.
mm,
And I wish that some people would get that, that kind, I guess, that stereotype, maybe,
mm.
like out of their talking points, because it doesn't serve any kind of good purpose to call a person stupid just because they're religious or anything like that. This is a question, whether or not God exists, that people just have differing opinions on. And
Yeah,
I don't like to say that it's not okay to have a differing opinion, depending on the context.
yeah,
Obviously, there are some opinions that can just, go away. But on this particular topic, I don't think that the differing opinion really warrants, any kind of like um, determination of someone's IQ level,
mm.
or whether or not somebody, can remember how to breathe or something like that. Like
Oh, right.
these are things that I've heard people say, and I just don't think that it's, beneficial to any kind of conversation, or beneficial in any kind of context. So I would hope that people would stop doing that.
Yeah, that's good. I appreciate that. It just goes to show that there are intelligent people on both sides, and we can have conversation. And ultimately, in the end, hopefully, both are truth seekers, which is why I speak a lot about truth, even on my channel. And of course, I believe that the Bible is true. Of course, I believe what Jesus taught was true. But ultimately, it's in the end, I'm seeking truth. And so, how we define that truth, how we come to that truth, is important. But I'm glad that you highlighted that. I want to ask you, if Christianity is true, let's say we make the assumption that it is true, is there anyone in your life now, or maybe that was in your life, that best lived out or was consistent with their Christian belief?
Um, I mean, I can't really say. Uh, I mean, obviously, I guess that if I had to pick anybody, it would be, there was this one guy in my neighborhood. His name is Brent, and he was training to be like a pastor, like a youth minister, or something of that nature. And I don't remember if he actually if he managed to actually keep going with that, but I know that he was trying to be like a youth pastor or whatever. But I mean, he probably was the one that most let out, like, I guess, the Christian faith. But I mean, I think that was because he was just really going headfirst into it.
Sure.
Being in the South, it kind of, like, this particular question puts me at a disadvantage, because here in the South, like, religion is so normalized and so ingrained into just the general
Mm,
community, that nobody really considers, at least in my experience. Obviously, that can differ, with different people, but in my experience, it was so ingrained that everybody just automatically assumed people were Christian, automatically assumed God exists and all this other stuff.
Yeah.
And so we never really thought about it. And even when I wasn't actively going to church or wasn't really active in in my community as a Christian, I still considered myself Christian because I believed in God, and specifically the Christian God. And so it didn't really seem to matter, at least until I became an atheist, because then all of a sudden, you know, people start trying to defend their God because now I'm an atheist.
Mm.
And so that's how it happened with a number of people around me. But for the most part, I mean, I can't really tell you a good answer other than my ambiguous friend Brent that I hadn't seen since I was, in middle school.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's just interesting. I'm just kind of curious, and that can be hard to define because people define Christianity different, and or the practice of Christianity. What does it mean to be a Christian? But it was just an interesting thought that I had. Do you believe that humans have free will? We talked about it a little bit earlier, but I'm just curious. You talked about Sam Harris and some of the debates you watched, and we're going to take this conversation a little bit different as far as maybe some specific things that you believe that I know atheists have differing beliefs on. But when it comes to the mind, when it comes to our actions, do you believe that they are determined, like it's just causation, like a domino effect? We're just today, our beliefs, our experiences, like I can't really choose to be a Christian. You can't really choose to be an atheist. That to have these conversations might even be unfruitful in the end because we can't determine that. Or is there free will? And if there is free will, how do we get there?
Well, so I don't believe. I guess it depends on what you mean by free will.
Mm-hmm.
If you mean the freedom to choose any particular decision for any event that comes up, I don't believe in that.
Okay.
I believe that you have the freedom of choice for decisions that or for solutions that present to you, but I don't think that all the solutions are presented to you or you're even able to like choose. Because like for instance, if you take one person who's a psychopath and obviously they're not going to choose to, or at least without prompting or without any kind of instruction, they they'll choose to cause havoc because that's what makes them happy. That's how psychopaths work, right? They're not going to choose to help the old lady across the street. They'd choose to help her into oncoming traffic or something.
Right.
That's just something that I am not programmed with. If you to use the program word
Sure.
a little bit loosely here, I just that like if I see an old lady that needs to get across the street, my instinct is not to cause her harm. It's to provide help for her. Like there's many different ways in which I can accomplish that. So I have the freedom of choice to accomplish it in any kind of way. But I only have the solutions that are presented to me, and I think that those are somewhat, I guess, quasi-determined, and I feel like that there's substantial like scientific evidence behind this because, like you can subliminally influence people with different things in their life. You can, your brain picks up a whole lot more messages than you even realize, and so you can influence a person's decision-making skills, and they think that they're doing something like wholly unpredictable or anything like that, when really they're performing the actions that somebody else wanted them to perform. But that's just because the person that's doing the controlling, the puppeting, knows which strings to pull in order to get that person to do whatever they want. I mean, this is you can see this in manipulation tactics that are just prevalent in our society now. So I think that there's not exactly determined, like there's not like, I don't exactly believe in determinism. I think that people have the freedom of choice, but at the same time, I think that we are subject to the chemical processes that happen in our brain. And
Mm.
so, because of that, we are limited in the amount of choices that we can make.
Yeah, I mean, it is no doubt a complicated subject to wrap our minds around. And I still wrestle, of course, with what that looks like. You know, as well as I do, that even in Christian circles, determinism, free will, foreknowledge, those things are hot topics of conversation. But I'm just always curious. You know, some are hard determinists that are atheist, and others have a little more play or loose in terminology. And it sounds like, you know, you're still wrestling with some things, and I hope that you know, we continue to grow in our knowledge in that. But that's just interesting. One thing I just have to know is, do you believe Jesus existed? I mean, was he a person, or are you kind of the legendary flavor that Jesus maybe is more of a figment of our imagination?
Well, I mean, regardless of whether or not, like, the historical person Jesus existed, I think that the concept of Jesus that we have now is mythical or legendary.
Okay.
But even at the like, as far as like a real historical Jesus, I would classify myself as a mythicist, which a
Okay.
lot of people like to throw the whole genetic fallacy my way, and say that you can't take anything that I say seriously because I don't think Jesus existed, which makes
Hmm.
no sense. It's a non
Sure.
sequitur.
Right.
But yeah, so I don't think that there was a historical Jesus, and I come to that conclusion based on the lack of evidence for a historical Jesus. I think that there's the arguments suggesting that Paul only ever considered Jesus to be celestial, and then, of course, I kind of go with the mainstream scholars on how the Gospels are perceived,
Mm.
being that they're not historical. So I really just sort of focus on Paul and what he says about Jesus. But considering that, I came to the conclusion that Jesus was most likely not a real historical figure. But that's not to say, like, a lot of people confuse that with Jesus just being made up out of whole cloth, or there not being some kind of progression from Judaism to Christianity. And it's my opinion that the Jewish theology was reinterpreted in, like the first or second century BCE and the first century AD. It was reinterpreted to understand these messianic prophecies in certain ways that are now reflected in what we know about Jesus.
Mm.
So it's not that Jesus was made out of whole cloth, it's that Jesus exists, or rather, the Messiah. People always
Mm.
get mixed up whenever you're talking about Jesus, like the historical human, and the Messiah figure of Jewish theology, because there's definitely a Messiah figure in Jewish theology. And I think that the information surrounding that figure, as understood by these early Jewish Christians, is what eventually became the Jesus that everybody thinks of now.
Mm. Yeah, well, I think you've given me a follow-up conversation, because I'd love to talk to you sometime about the historical Jesus. And this is a great way to have a conversation for us to kind of think about what would be good follow-up dialogue. But I've been enjoying this. I want to kind of exit out with a last question here, and then let you get back to the rest of your evening. Again, appreciate you being on. So if God does exist, what is he hiding from you that he would have to show you so that you might believe?
That's a really good question, but I think that the best answer that you could get, hopefully, from anybody, is that I don't know.
Mm.
I believed in God for the longest time, and and only then, once I started thinking a little bit more about it, I found myself unconvinced of it, right?
Mm.
And so, I don't know what kind of evidence I would need in order to convince myself away from, like, atheism, I guess.
Mhm.
But what I can know is that if God is, all knowing, and if God does want people to believe in Him,
Mm.
then He should know what would convince me. And so
Yeah.
I don't really think it's incumbent upon me to know what would convince me. Um, but I do think that if God does exist, then He would most definitely know.
Yeah, I think sometimes we don't know what we don't know, right? It doesn't seem very profound, but the truth is that just like you didn't know the day that you had the conversation with your buddy early on the baseball field that it was going to change your belief or start a transition, a journey where you would start thinking about other things. And again, that's why I don't shy away from conversations like this. I am a full time pastor. I have the actual faith channel on the side. So I'm very open to discussing belief. I think one of the biggest problems in the church today, if I can pinpoint it, are pastors and teachers or spiritual quote leaders that don't allow people to ask questions, challenge their beliefs. Because in the end, if I truly believe that God does exist, then He will make Himself known. And I have to believe the same thing you said, and that is that God would know what it would require of you, John, to believe, or for me to believe, or anyone. And we just need to leave that in His hands. But, John, I want to thank you for being on Actual Faith today. If you have any questions, by the way, and you're watching about personally knowing God, about truth, the about Christianity, maybe some things about the channel, I'd encourage you to check out some of the short clips that I've done, as well as the link in the description, What is Truth? You're also going to find some more information about John's channel, Godless Engineer, which I'm thankful that he came on today. And John, I hope that you have a good evening. Now, as we close out, I want to remind you that faith is not a blind leap in the dark. Actual faith is trusting and believing the unknown because of the known. So I want to thank you for joining us today. God bless you, and we'll see you next time.